Band members Gary and Jerry, having discovered drummer Glenn's two-bedroom rental on Oklahoma Street very convenient. During their practice sessions, the band would conveniently leave the front door open, the melodious sound of the session resonating for the neighbors to hear. And on occasion the neighborhood children would arrive at the door bearing homemade delectables and song requests. Their lodging did present one concern, but it was more like an occupational hazard, when returning from an out-of-town engagement, discovering acquaintances frequenting the house, not minding so much their crashing, but not appreciative of the rate on the refrigerator. A decision was made. It was time to padlock the house, but a problem still remained. Many of the windows refused to lock, and on occasion an unexpected guest could find an alternate entrance. Glenn was in need of further transportation, his '52 Chevrolet having given up the ghost. Jerry's '53 Ford convertible the sole surviving mode for getting around. Gary wasn't surprised one Saturday afternoon when Glenn drove up in a rough-looking 1953 Nash. His one thought, "How did you come up with this wreck?" Glenn's explanation was to the point, "I found the cheapest car on the lot, offering to put $100 down and sign a promissory note for the balance." The highlighters soon discovering, besides providing transportation, it possessed another much-needed trait. Nash being one of the first Detroit cars with 90-degree reclining front seats. On warm nights, when discovering their beds taken by various guests after returning from their weekend gig, Gary and Glenn would grab a blanket and partake of the car's reclining seats. The downside of the automotive resting place was, not only waking to the sun shining in your face, but the neighbor kids staring at you through the windows. The invention was a godsend for road-traveling piano-playing musicians. Its first notoriety was sculptured by Ray Charles, utilizing the instrument for his #1 national hit, "What I Say." The acclaimed musician introducing the Wurlitzer electric piano to the spotlight of prominence. The city of Lawton having two prevalent music stores, the multi-generational Hardy Suggs Music and the much newer store Lawton Music, the band preferring business with the elderly Hardy. But discovering Lawton Music was the Wurlitzer piano distributor and just happened to have one in stock. Gary immediately seizing the opportunity to bring the piano into the fold, the Wurlitzer 110 model becoming the newest member of the band. The piano having a 64 keyboard range, about an octave shorter on either end of a regular piano keyboard. Gary soon discovering the bottom octave could be utilized as a keyboard base by splitting the sustain bar from the pedal action, and plugging into an amplifier with the bass setting turned up, adding a much-needed sound to the band. A Saturday night, the band loading the equipment in the Nash, Glenn at the helm, Gary riding shotgun, Jerry following in his Ford, their destination once again, the Colony Club in Altus. The 55-mile drive very uneventful, except for the last 5 miles, both Glenn and Gary hearing a new sound emitting from the Nash Airflight 6-cylinder motor. It wasn't loud, but telling, both having experienced this sound before. It was the beginning voice of a cylinder rod bearing in distress. The sound seemed to mellow, and with their destination just a few minutes away they continued on. The club performance coming to a conclusion, loading the band equipment in the Nash, the return trip beginning, Jerry following in the Ford. The sound they had first heard on the drive down didn't sound as threatening as before, giving raise that the trip could be completed. About 30 miles from Altus their sense of security began to wane, as the slight tapping sound from the engine increased in volume, becoming noticeably louder. Glenn beginning to slow down, a knocking began, then increasing, echoing like a hammer striking metal, but then abruptly, silence, and for an instant the motor was smooth. The only noticeable sound was the wind through the open windows as the Nash continuing down the highway. The silence wasn't lasting, another knocking began, and like the first, its sound raising in volume reaching a crescendo, a sudden jolt and once again silence, but this time it was short-lived. Immediately smoke began to fill the traveling vehicle. A third rod began protesting, its knocking voice straining to be heard, windows being rolled down, the smoke making it difficult to see and breathe, the Nash's forward progress rapidly descending, the two riders bearing witness to a motorized death. The Nash coasting to the side of the road, Jerry, who was following in the Ford, stopping, excited and aghast at what had happened, relating how it was difficult to see the road because of the smoke bellowing from the Nash. Transferring the band equipment to the Ford, the three leaving the Nash at its resting place, making the decision to return with a rope and tow it back in the morning. The next morning, back at the Oklahoma Street rental, Glenn lifting the hood to perform a visual autopsy. The oil-bathed six-cylinder motor providing an unreal sight, the left side of the engine block destroyed, a gaping hole where the cylinder rod traversed. Gary, well aware of the band's dire financial situation, inquiring Glenn as to a remedy for the situation, Glenn shaking his head, replying the only alternative would be to stop making his payments, leave the keys in it and let the dealer re-pull the Nash. It wasn't too much later when, as expected, the dealer showed up, approaching the house, his knock at the door unanswered, returning to the car, sitting behind the wheel attempting to start it. Glenn watching as the dealer drove away. Soon afterwards a tow truck arrived. Gary somewhat concerned about the dealer being a victim, but Glenn responding, "I'm the victim," adding, "It stands to reason, the dealer knew the inevitable." Gary was still troubled about the dealer and the shock he would ensue when lifting the hood, but then again he was very much conscious that with discovery, payback can be unrewarding.